My name is Cora Beaumont. For the better part of my 47 years, I have lived my life as a gardener might, with patience and a quiet faith in the unseen potential of things. I tend to what is put before me, believing that with enough care, sunlight, and gentle encouragement, anything can find its way to blooming. I live in Seabrook Harbor, a town that drapes itself along the South Carolina coast like a string of forgotten pearls, a place where the air is thick with the scent of salt marsh and sweet olive, and the ancient oaks drip with Spanish moss, whispering stories older than memory. It is a town that understands patience. For 24 years, I had tended to my marriage to Julian with this same devotion. It was a Tuesday in early May when the call came. The afternoon sun, heavy and golden, was streaming into my sunroom, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and warming the terracotta pots where my fledgling lemon trees were just beginning to unfurl new leaves. I was sketching a design for a client's courtyard garden, lost in the pleasant geometry of flagstone paths and flowering borders, when my phone vibrated against the worn oak of my drafting table. Julian's name glowed on the screen. He was supposed to be at a historical preservation conference in Annapolis. "Cora," he began, his voice imbued with that familiar, faintly theatrical warmth he used when he was about to present an idea as a foregone conclusion. There was a strange, hollow echo to his voice, and beneath it, the faint, rhythmic hushing of waves. Not the choppy sounds of the Chesapeake Bay. This was the long, slow sigh of an ocean. "Julian? Is everything all right? I thought you were in sessions all afternoon." "Everything is more than all right, Cora. It's clarified." He paused, and I could practically see him running a hand through his distinguished, silver-streaked hair, a gesture meant to convey a sort of pained gravitas. "I'm calling from a little place in the Caribbean. I've met someone, you see. Someone who, well, she sees me for who I am now, not who I was 20 years ago." I remained silent, my charcoal pencil poised above the vellum. Outside, a Carolina wren trilled a cheerful, oblivious song. I focused on the sound, a tiny anchor in the suddenly shifting world. Julian took my silence as his cue to continue, his tone softening into one of a patient, if slightly weary, teacher. "We need to be practical about this. I've done us both the favor of taking the first step. That inheritance your great-aunt left you, it was a lovely windfall, but it was just sitting there. I've moved it into an account under my name. It will be the seed capital for my new life. A clean break, a fresh start. It's better this way, you'll see. Less messy than involving lawyers and all that." The words didn't crash over me like a wave. They seeped in slowly, a cold, creeping tide. He had said my new life, not our new lives. He spoke of my inheritance, the legacy of my beloved Aunt Matilda, as if it were a shared resource he had the right to administrate. The background noise registered more clearly now, not just waves, but the tinkling of ice in a glass, and a soft, feminine laugh that was not my own. "You should have let me help you manage it properly from the start, Corey," he added, using the pet name he knew I disliked, a name that always made me feel small and sweetly incompetent. "You've always been more of an artist than a financier." A profound stillness settled over me. It was not shock, not yet. It was a moment of absolute, crystalline clarity. The years of my patient tending, my quiet accommodations, my habit of pruning my own needs to give his ambitions more room to grow, all of it collapsed into this single, stark moment of betrayal. He thought he was cutting down a tree. He had no idea he was striking stone. My voice, when it came, was as calm and even as the coastal horizon. "I see," I whispered. "Well, Julian, I hope you'll be very happy." Then I ended the call. I set my phone down on the table, face down. I picked up my pencil and, with a hand that was surprisingly steady, drew a perfect, delicate blossom on the corner of the blueprint. A camellia, a symbol of adoration and eternal love, but also, in some traditions, a symbol of a noble death. My 24-year marriage had just died, not with a bang, but with the patronizing murmur of a man I no longer knew. "I work as a landscape designer," a profession I came to late in life, after my son, Simon, went off to college. It's a second career that feels more like a first love. I spend my days creating spaces of beauty and sanctuary for others, coaxing life from the soil. I've learned that the most resilient gardens are not always the most flamboyant. They are the ones with deep roots, the ones prepared for drought and storm. Julian saw my quiet nature, my preference for observing over orating, as a kind of gentle passivity. He mistook my patience for a lack of purpose. But Julian, for all his academic brilliance as a history professor, had always been a poor student of the present. He was especially ignorant of the lessons taught to me by my great-aunt Matilda. I pushed my chair back and walked into the kitchen, the old heart pine floors cool beneath my bare feet. I poured myself a glass of iced sweet tea, the ritual so familiar it was grounding. My laptop was on the kitchen island. I opened it, my fingers moving with a calm deliberation that felt foreign and yet deeply innate. I navigated to the website of a private wealth management firm, one whose name Julian had never heard me speak, Keystone Legacy Partners. The inheritance from Aunt Matilda, a portfolio of ethically managed funds, and the deed to her small, beautiful, slightly dilapidated house on a nearby barrier island, amounting to a value of nearly $900,000, had been my emotional bedrock for the 2 years since she'd passed. It was my connection to her, a tangible piece of her wisdom and love. Julian's timing, I thought as I logged in, was not merely poor, it was poetically disastrous. He had no idea that Aunt Matilda, a woman who had navigated the Great Depression, 2 wars, and a philandering husband of her own, had been a master of protecting what was hers. She wasn't paranoid, she was prudent. She had taught me the art of building beautiful, sturdy fences. And I had learned the lesson well. The phone buzzed again on the drafting table in the other room. I ignored it. Let him wonder. Let him puzzle over my calm acceptance. He believed he had just executed a clever, swift coup. He was about to discover that he had, in fact, willingly walked into a conservatory full of rare and exquisitely sensitive tripwires. The sun was setting, painting the marsh grasses in hues of lavender and rose. I took a slow sip of my tea. For the first time in a very long time, I felt the ground beneath my feet was entirely my own. Growing up, I was the dreamer, the quiet child who preferred the company of books and the intricate worlds within flowers to the loud, chaotic games of my peers. I met Julian in the library at the University of Virginia. He was a graduate student in history, all tweed jackets and impassioned speeches about the fall of Rome. I was an undergraduate studying art history, captivated by his intellect and the way he seemed to burn with a purpose so bright it illuminated everyone around him. He spoke of a life of the mind, of creating a home that would be a bastion of culture and intelligence. I, with my quieter passions, was to be the curator of that beautiful life. For more than 2 decades, I played my part with loving diligence. I managed our home, our social calendar, and our finances with a gardener's quiet efficiency. I created a peaceful, beautiful environment where his career could flourish. When he got his professorship at the college here in Seabrook Harbor, I designed the gardens around our home to be his sanctuary. Meanwhile, Julian's ambition grew, and with it, a sense of entitlement that I failed to recognize for what it was. His small neglects became larger ones. The forgotten anniversaries, the business trips that seemed to stretch a little too long, the way he'd discuss our finances as my salary and our expenses. I was the soil, he was the magnificent oak, and I told myself that this was the natural order of things. My great-aunt Matilda was the one person who saw the imbalance. She had lived to be 96, her mind as sharp as a shard of sea glass until the very end. She was a force of nature, a woman who had run her own small but successful textile import business in an era when women were expected only to run households. In the last years of her life, I would drive out to her island house every Sunday. We'd sit on her screened-in porch, drinking gin and tonics and watching the pelicans dive. Cora, my love, she told me one afternoon, her voice a papery rustle, a woman must have a garden of her own. A place that is hers to tend, that no one else can touch. Not just land, but a financial garden. A place for your own roots to grow deep, so no storm can knock you over. I had smiled then, thinking it was just one of Matilda's romantic metaphors. I loved Julian. Our finances were entwined, our lives a single tapestry. But she had been insistent. When she passed away, I learned the full extent of her foresight. Her will was explicit. Her lawyer, a woman named Helen Shaw, and her financial advisor, Beatrice Finch, were instructed to help me place the inheritance into a protected trust. The Matilda Beaumont Legacy Trust was not a standard account. Beatrice, a woman with a no-nonsense demeanor and kind, intelligent eyes, had explained it to me in her quiet, elegant office in Charleston. This is an ironclad revocable living trust, she'd said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger on the thick document. It's designed to shield inherited assets from marital claims, creditors, and any form of unauthorized access. Your name is the only one on it. To move a single dollar requires a multi-step verification process that includes voice recognition, a secure key, and a verbal password known only to you and me. Julian's name was nowhere. At the time, setting it up felt almost like a betrayal, a secret I was keeping. He knew I'd inherited money and property, of course, but he'd been dismissive of the details. Just put it in our joint savings, Corey, he'd said with a wave of his hand. We'll use it to renovate the kitchen eventually. When I told him I'd followed Matilda's wishes and put it in a separate, managed fund, he'd been faintly irritated. You and your aunt and her Depression-era paranoia, he'd scoffed. It's needlessly complicated. He never asked about it again, assuming, I suppose, it was in some simple investment account he could charm his way into if he ever needed to. What he must have tried to access was our joint checking account, into which I occasionally transferred small, budgeted amounts from the trust's earnings for household projects, just as Beatrice had advised. He must have seen a transfer on a bank statement and assumed the source account was the motherlode. I sat at my kitchen island, the laptop glowing in the twilight. The trust's dashboard was a picture of tranquility. Every dollar, every stock, every bond was exactly where it was supposed to be, quietly accumulating value. Julian hadn't stolen my future. He had only stolen a few $1,000s from a joint account, an act that was less a heist and more a piece of petty, pathetic evidence. The phone in the sunroom began to ring again, a shrill, insistent demand in the quiet house. I let it go to voicemail. I had a feeling this was only the beginning. Julian had tried to set a fire to burn our life down, assuming I would be trapped inside. He didn't realize I was standing outside the whole time, holding the only key to the gate. The call I was expecting came at 7 o'clock the next morning. I was in my garden, coffee in hand, watching the dew glitter on the petals of the climbing roses that snaked up the side of our house. The air was cool and clean. I had slept a dreamless, deeply peaceful sleep. Cora, what in God's name did you do? Julian's voice was stripped of its usual smooth confidence. It was tight, frayed, laced with a panic he was failing to conceal. Good morning, Julian, I said, my voice serene. How is the Caribbean? Don't play games with me. I spoke to the bank. They've frozen the account. They're talking about a security breach and an internal investigation. They mentioned fraud. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee. The rich, dark flavor was a small, perfect pleasure. Well, that does sound serious. It's almost as if someone tried to move a very large sum of money from an account that didn't belong to them. Banks have protocols for that sort of thing. A sputtering sound came through the phone. It's our money. We're married. I'm your husband. Are you? I asked, the question genuine. I walked over to a bed of lavender, crushing a few blossoms between my fingers, inhaling the clean, calming scent. Because yesterday, you told me you were starting a new life with someone else. As for the money, you're mistaken. The inheritance is held in a protected trust, in my name alone. Aunt Matilda was very specific about that. By attempting to access it without authorization, you didn't just overdraw our checking account, Julian. It seems you've committed a crime. The silence on his end was so complete I could hear the faint squawk of a distant seagull through his receiver. The waves were still there, a mocking, gentle rhythm. You're lying, he finally choked out. Marital assets are shared. That's the law. Inherited assets placed in a specifically designed protective trust are not, Julian. Especially not in cases of, shall we say, spousal malfeasance. I let the legal-sounding term hang in the air. I had read Matilda's trust documents cover to cover. The bank, you see, doesn't view your attempt as a simple marital disagreement. They view it as attempted wire fraud. I could hear his breathing, ragged and fast. In the background, a woman's voice, sleepy and annoyed. Julian? What's wrong? Come back to bed. My replacement. The foundation of his fresh start. She sounded very young. Cora, you need to call the bank. Right now. You need to tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave me permission. His voice was pleading now, the professorial authority gone, replaced by the whine of a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. Why would I do that? I asked softly. Because we have 24 years together. Because you love me. Because this is just a stupid mistake. No, Julian, I said, my voice gentle but unyielding. The mistake was you calling me yesterday to gloat about your affair and your theft. The mistake was believing, after all this time, that you still had the right to manage my life. The mistake was underestimating me. I paused, looking up at the morning sky, a vast, clear expanse of blue. I'm calling my lawyer this morning, Julian. Her name is Helen Shaw. I believe she'll be in touch with you soon. You can't divorce me. You can't do this. I'm not doing anything, Julian, I said, and it was the truest thing I'd said in years. You've already done it all yourself. I hung up the phone and placed it on the garden bench. I did not feel vengeful or triumphant. I felt pruned. Cut back to the essential, strongest parts of myself. The dead wood was gone. It was time to see what would grow in its place. By 9:30, I was sitting in the serene, book-lined offices of Shaw and Associates in Charleston's historic district. Helen Shaw was a woman in her late 60s with a sweep of silver hair and an air of formidable calm that reminded me so much of Aunt Matilda. She had been Matilda's lawyer for 30 years and had helped me draw up the trust. Cora, she said, looking over the notes I'd made, her expression a mixture of professional focus and personal sympathy. I am so sorry you are going through this. But I have to say, Matilda would be raising her gin and tonic to you right now. She always said Julian's charm was a currency he spent too freely. I had brought everything. A log of Julian's increasingly frequent conferences, the credit card statements I'd started examining a few months ago, which showed charges for romantic dinners and boutique hotel rooms in cities he wasn't supposed to be in. The small, niggling doubts I had pushed aside for years had finally coalesced into a quiet, sad certainty. I hadn't been looking for proof to confront him. I'd been looking for the truth to steady myself. The most astonishing part, Helen mused, peering at my notes over her half-moon glasses, is his sheer audacity. To think he could simply transfer the entire trust. He never bothered with the details, I explained. He saw a deposit from Keystone Legacy into our joint account and assumed it was the primary account. I had left the bank statement on my desk last month. I think he must have photographed it. It wasn't a trap I had set, not consciously. It was simply my own paperwork, my own life, which he had observed with a thief's eye. He saw account numbers and opportunity. He failed to see the intricate security woven around them. There's something else, I said, my voice quiet. I slid a file across her polished mahogany desk. Over the last year, Julian has been systematically moving small amounts of money from our joint savings and investment accounts. Nothing large enough to be immediately obvious. It totals nearly $30,000. Helen's eyebrows rose. And where did it go? I hired a discreet inquiry agent 2 months ago, I confessed, feeling a flush of shame at the clandestine nature of it. Not to spy, but to understand what was happening to our shared future. The money was funneled into a new account, opened 8 months ago in his name only. It was used to pay for flights, jewelry, gifts for a young woman named Sophie, a graduate student in his department. Helen's expression was grimly satisfied. Cora, the evidence you have gathered is meticulous. It establishes a clear pattern of financial dissipation and infidelity. His actions yesterday are the capstone. It's not just grounds for divorce, it's leverage for a settlement that is entirely in your favor. There's one final thing, I said, remembering a clause Beatrice had pointed out to me. When we established the trust, we included a specific provision Matilda insisted upon. It's called an in terrorem, or no contest clause, but we adapted it. It stipulates that any fraudulent attempt to access or contest the trust by a spouse automatically nullifies their claim to any and all shared marital assets. Helen looked up, a slow, appreciative smile spreading across her face. You mean to tell me that his stunt yesterday triggered a clause that makes him forfeit his share of the house, the shared savings, everything? According to the document, yes. As of yesterday afternoon, Julian essentially signed away his financial life with me. I felt a deep, resonant sense of gratitude for the fierce, protective love of the woman who had thought of everything. Aunt Matilda didn't believe in leaving things to chance. Your aunt, Helen said, leaning back in her chair, was not just a wise woman. She was a brilliant tactician. The call from Beatrice Finch at Keystone Legacy Partners came as I was driving back over the Ashley River Bridge, the marshland sprawling out below me in a tapestry of green and gold. Her voice was crisp and professional, but I could hear an undercurrent of steely satisfaction. Mrs. Beaumont, I'm calling to update you. Mr. Vance has been in contact with our head office no fewer than a dozen times this morning. He's been rather insistent. I can imagine. What have you told him? That the matter is now under an official security review, and all communication must go through legal channels. We have also, per standard procedure, reported the attempted unauthorized access to the relevant federal banking authorities. I gripped the steering wheel. Federal? Yes. The amount he attempted to transfer and the interstate nature of the act, from the Caribbean to a bank in South Carolina, triggers federal jurisdiction. Attempted wire fraud across state lines is something they take very seriously. She paused. Furthermore, our security logs show this wasn't his first attempt to gain information. We have records of 3 calls over the past 6 months and 1 in-person visit to our Charleston office in February, where he presented himself as your husband and financial proxy, requesting a summary of your portfolio. A cold shock went through me. This wasn't a spontaneous, desperate act. This was premeditated. He had been probing the defenses for months, looking for a weakness. He had been smiling at me over dinner, discussing our future, while actively planning to plunder it. Of course, our associates gave him no information. Beatrice continued smoothly, but the attempts are all logged, dated, and time-stamped. It establishes a clear pattern of intent. I am compiling a complete file for Ms. Shaw. It should be on her desk by this afternoon. Thank you, Beatrice, for everything. We are merely fulfilling the mission your great-aunt established for us, Cora, to act as stewards and guardians. She would be very pleased with your composure and fortitude. After the call, I pulled over at a scenic overlook, cutting the engine. I watched the shrimp boats chug slowly toward the harbor. 24 years. I had loved a man, a life, an idea of a future. But the man had become a stranger, the life an illusion. Or perhaps, I thought with a pang of sorrow, the signs had been there all along, and I had simply chosen to see them as weeds to be pulled, rather than evidence of a blighted garden. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. This is Sophie. Julian told me what you're doing to him. How could you be so cruel? He loves you, he's just confused. You're destroying his life over a stupid mistake. I stared at the words. He loves you. The lie was so audacious, so naive, it was almost pitiable. This young woman had no idea she was the supporting actress in a tragedy Julian was writing for himself. I thought for a moment, then typed a single, quiet sentence back. I suggest you find a good lawyer. His problems are just beginning. I blocked the number. I forwarded the message to Helen with a note, contact information for the other party. Then I started the car and drove home. I had plants that needed watering. Life, real and tangible and patient, was waiting for me. The two men who arrived at my door late the next afternoon did not look like they belonged in Seabrook Harbor. They wore dark, practical suits that seemed to wilt in the humid air, and their expressions were devoid of the easygoing warmth of my neighbors. They were from the FBI. Mrs. Beaumont? I'm Agent Donovan, and this is Agent Cole. May we come in? I led them to the sunroom, the same room where my world had tilted on its axis 2 days before. They sat stiffly on the wicker chairs. I offered them iced tea, which they politely declined. Ma'am, we are investigating an incident of attempted wire fraud reported by Keystone Legacy Partners, Agent Donovan began, his eyes scanning the room before settling on me. We understand the attempt was made by your husband, William Vance. Yes, that's correct. I sat opposite them, my hands resting in my lap, my posture calm. Inside, my heart was beating a slow, heavy drum. Can you walk us through the events of the past few days, from your perspective? I recounted the story calmly and factually. Julian's call, his announcement, my subsequent conversations with my lawyer and financial advisor. I explained the nature of the trust and the wisdom of my late aunt. I left out the emotional devastation. That was mine, not theirs. This was about facts. Agent Cole, the younger of the two, was taking notes. So, your husband was under the impression he could simply transfer nearly $1 million from a trust he had no legal access to, all while informing you he was leaving you for another woman? Julian has always possessed a significant sense of self-assurance, I said, which felt like the most diplomatic way to put it. And you've had no contact with him since your call yesterday morning? Agent Donovan asked. None. My lawyer has advised me to cease all communication. They thanked me for my cooperation and gave me a card. There's one more thing, Mrs. Beaumont, Agent Donovan said as he stood to leave. Mr. Vance booked a one-way flight from Street Barts to Panama City, departing tomorrow morning. From there, it's a short flight to a number of countries that do not have extradition treaties with the United States. His actions suggest an intent to flee. The news settled in my stomach like a stone. He wasn't just running from our marriage, he was trying to run from the consequences of his own actions. The charming, brilliant professor was, at his core, a coward. After they left, I wandered out into my garden. The evening light was soft, and the air was fragrant with the heady perfume of blooming jasmine. I felt a profound wave of sadness, not for the man Julian had become, but for the man I once thought he was. The one who read poetry to me in the university library, the one whose eyes lit up when he talked about history, the one I had promised to love and cherish. That man was gone, if he had ever truly existed at all. My phone rang. It was Julian, calling from a new number. Against my better judgment, I answered. I needed, for myself, to hear his voice one last time, to know for certain that there was nothing left to salvage. Corey? Thank God. You have to stop this. This is insane. The FBI? They've frozen my credit cards. Sophie is hysterical. You're ruining my life. His voice was a frantic torrent of accusation. There was no apology, no remorse, only outrage that his plans had been thwarted. I'm not doing anything, Julian, I said, my voice barely a whisper. This is the garden you planted. You are simply reaping what you have sown. What does that even mean? Speak plainly. What do you want from me? Money? Is that it? What will it take to make you call them off? There is nothing I want from you, I said, and the truth of it was liberating. And I can't call them off. They're not my dogs, Julian. They're the consequences. They belong to you. I ended the call and turned off my phone. I sank down onto the cool grass, leaning my back against the sturdy trunk of a live oak. I closed my eyes and just breathed, in and out, matching the rhythm of the tide pulling away from the shore. The news of Julian's arrest came 3 days later, in a brief, professional call from Agent Donovan. He and Sophie had been detained by federal agents at the airport in Miami during a layover. They were trying to get to Costa Rica. Julian was being held on charges of attempted wire fraud and conspiracy. I thanked the agent, hung up, and then I went to the piano in the living room, a beautiful old Steinway that had been my mother's. I hadn't played in years. But my fingers found the keys, and I began to play a simple, melancholic Chopin nocturne. The music filled the quiet house, a lament not for what I had lost, but for the years I had spent tending to a mirage. 6 months later, I stood on the wraparound porch of the house on Matilda's Island. The divorce had been finalized in a quiet, anticlimactic hearing. Julian, appearing via video link from a federal detention center, had agreed to everything. His hubris had been replaced by a hollow-eyed defeat. The forfeiture clause in the trust had held firm. I kept our home in Seabrook Harbor, my retirement accounts, and, of course, Matilda's legacy. Julian kept his public defender and the prospect of several years in a low-security federal prison, a sentence he received a month later. The island house, which had been sitting quiet and neglected, was now my project. My sanctuary. I'd hired a local contractor, and we were slowly, carefully bringing it back to life. The salt-bleached shutters were being replaced, the cypress floors refinished, the overgrown gardens cleared to make way for new life. It was hard, satisfying work. I spent most of my days here with my dog, Ranger, for company, breathing in the clean, briny air. Helen had driven out to the island to bring me the final paperwork. We sat on the porch in 2 rocking chairs, drinking lemonade. He sent a letter, she said, pulling an envelope from her briefcase. From prison. I haven't opened it. It's up to you if you want to read it. I took the envelope. Julian's familiar, elegant script addressed to me. I held it for a moment, weighing it in my hand. It felt impossibly light. I thought about the man who wrote it, the life we'd shared, the damage he had wrought. And I realized, with a sense of profound peace, that I had no curiosity about what was inside. His words no longer had any power over me. I handed it back to Helen. Would you mind getting rid of this for me? I asked. She smiled, a warm, approving smile. I would be delighted. She tucked it away. There is one more thing. Beatrice asked me to give this to you. Matilda left it in her keeping. Her instructions were to give it to you when you were standing firmly in your own garden again. She handed me a smaller, older envelope, made of thick, creamy paper. My name was written on the front in Matilda's spidery, elegant hand. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. My dearest Cora, if you are reading this, it means the fence is held. I am sorry you had need of them, but I am not sorry you had them to use. Remember, my love, that the strongest roots are the ones we cultivate in secret, for ourselves. The world will always be full of charming men who believe a woman's life is a resource for them to manage. Let them think it. And while they are admiring their own reflections, you must be tending to your own soul. What you have inherited from me is not money. It is freedom. It is the peace of mind that comes from knowing you are the sole architect of your own life. Now, go and build something beautiful. Something that will last. All my love. Matilda. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of gratitude, of love, of homecoming. I folded the letter and tucked it into my pocket. Ranger rested his head on my knee, and I stroked his soft ears, looking out at the marsh. The tide was coming in, filling the creeks, nourishing the grasses, turning the landscape a vibrant, living green. The betrayal had been a fire, yes, but it had cleared the way for new growth. Julian had thought he was taking everything from me, but in the end, he had only given me back to myself. The future was no longer a path I walked beside someone else. It was an open field, and I had a gardener's hands, a pocket full of seeds, and all the time in the world. And I was finally ready to see what would bloom.